to your understanding, what has happened that Donald Trump has decided to withdraw or make some sort of deal between the United States and Yemen?
I can only surmise. I have a few facts, but I can only really surmise. And I think it's a double or triple pronged affair with Donald, if I can attribute any kind of reason and purpose to him. One is he wanted to stick his finger yet again, and he's doing it right now, this moment, as he wings his way, I guess, towards the Middle East, in Bibi's eyes. So he divorced the United States from the Yemen conflict, even though the Al-Ansar might not have had anything to do with it. He just said, we quit, we're not going to do it anymore. Second reason, I think, is because the Pentagon was telling him it was grossly expensive. And in two ways. It was expensive in terms of expending those items that we might need, really, in a war. Very expensive items. We were losing drones. We were losing F-18s. No, I've told many people we lost aircraft off of Vietnam quite frequently. It's not uncommon to do that sort of thing when you're in heavy carrier operations, especially multi-battle group operations. So it's not something that doesn't happen. People just don't realize that, being in the military is dangerous. At the same time, that's very expensive. And the drones add to that expense, $30 million a pop. And the military was probably telling him some of the things that we've discussed here, that, confining a carrier or a carrier and its escorts in such a narrow water is not a really good thing to do. You're really looking at possible real problems in the future. And another reason is because I think the assessment of the Pentagon was essentially that if you want to put it in these stark terms, we were losing.
And Larry, before commenting on what has happened, here is what Donald Trump mentioned about it.
Very good news last night. The Houthis have announced that they are not, or they've announced to us at least, that they don't want to fight anymore. They just don't want to fight. And we will honor that. And we will stop the bombings. And they have capitulated. But more importantly, we will take their word. They say they will not be blowing up ships anymore. And that's what the purpose of what.
Yeah.
Love that term, capitulated.
Yeah.
I can see the head of Al looking in his English dictionary.
This is, this is sort of Donald Trump's equivalent of Gerald Ford going on television saying, "Hey, you got a phone call from those North Vietnamese last night. They've capitulated, so we're leaving Saigon. Everybody run for the helicopters."
Yeah.
This was Trump's equivalent of April 30th, 1975 in Saigon. Look, Trump, the Saudis made it clear that Trump needed to stop this. Number one, that was also a role. And the fact that the Omanis got into the middle of it, brokering it, suggested to me that this was actually broader than just stopping the bombing of the Houthis. That maybe they're going to come to a deal with Iran. Trump would be, it'd be to his credit if he goes through with it. But as Colonel Wilkerson noted, this was just in terms of aircraft loss between Predator drones and the F-18s, you're looking at about $1 billion right there. And then they flew over 1,000 sorties. Well, God knows how much each one of those cost in terms of ordnance that was dropped, plus the maintenance on the aircraft. And many of us predicted this at the outset. It was like trying to punch a bag of Jello. The Houthis aren't going to be defeated with conventional means, and the United States, it exposed the limits of U.S. military power. So, Trump, he's putting that lipstick on a pig, putting a blonde wig on it, and calling it Marilyn Monroe. But you know what? It was still the U.S. withdrawn.
And what Larry said there about demonstrating the limits of U.S. military power is such a potent statement. Look at what Afghanistan did. Look at what Iraq did. Look at what all of our excursions, basically since the first Gulf War, or that little no knock drug bust in Panama called Just Cause. We haven't had a success in 2-3 decades. And it's all because, not all, but it's a large part because we take on things that military power is not appropriate for.
Yeah, very, very true.
What's going on, Larry, in the Trump administration? It seems that he feels that Netanyahu is manipulating his administration in the favor of Israel. That's why
you think?
Yeah.
What was your first clue?
It's important that he perceives that.
Up in the New York Times this morning, even a blind pig will find an occasional acorn. Tom found an acorn.
So I like to say, even Helen Keller could see this one. Yeah.
That's unkind to Helen.
I know. Good Lord. This is, it's if true. I always put if true, because sometimes I get my hopes mixed up with reality. But if this is true, it's a good sign that, Trump there's only enough room for Donald Trump in the room, and he can't have another pretender to take center stage. And so, I hope the BB has overstepped, and that Trump has finally said, "Look, we're not going to tie ourselves to him." This, it goes along with the explanation that was given for getting rid of Mike Waltz. Demoting him to the United Nations of all places. So, I welcome it.
Colonel, I would wonder what has happened between the Trump administration and the Israeli one and the Netanyahu administration in terms of the decision on the part of the United States to find some sort of common ground with Houthis, or maybe a peace or some sort of deal between the two parties. Here is what the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, we know how pro-Israel he is. And he said that we don't need Israel's permission to conclude an agreement with the Houthis. And if one of the 700,000 American citizens inside Israel is hurt by a Houthi attack, then we'll respond. Otherwise, we have nothing to do with it. What does that mean for you, Colonel?
Well, this is growing into a realization by a lot of people, even in this circus administration, that we're not gaining any points whatsoever on the face of the earth with this business in Gaza. In fact, we're losing many. And one of the things I think brought it home to the Pentagon, for example, was what he actually did with the Knesset, with full approval, apparently, and then post-Knesset, the cabinet again, full approval, he's calling it a sustained military operation. Well, what that means is essentially CPA Iraq in Gaza. What it means is what Sharon evacuated Gaza for in 2005, shut down 21 settlements and evacuated every single IDF person, because he knew if he stayed, there'd be an insurgency that would bleed the IDF interminably. Yeah. That's what he's asking for now. Netanyahu is asking for that. And oh, by the way, the Gaza terrain, which wasn't all that conducive to such an insurgency then, is maximally so now. There are 250, 500-pound bombs buried all over the place that are inert, didn't go off, duds, in other words. They make IEDs out of them. They used one the other day and blew a Makava tank off the face of the earth. That's what's going to happen to the IDF, and it's already hurting badly. Its PTSD count is now over 10,000. It's got 7,500 additional that are on the margin of PTSD. Lots of reservists are not answering the call. The problems are just manifest throughout the ranks, and he's taking on he hasn't honored a single day of the ceasefire with Lebanon. He's bombing the hell out of it again. He's bombing in Syria. He's protecting the Druze. He's doing all these things that are overextending him, but this sustained military operation in Gaza is going to finish him. And I'll be amazed if we let him start it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Derek.
Yeah. No. The situation with Israel, they didn't learn the lessons of Stalingrad. You know, what made the Battle of Stalingrad so difficult for the Germans was they went in and they bombed, they leveled the whole city, and they created all this rubble. And so actually the tanks couldn't really maneuver through the streets. So they were forced to fight on foot. And all of that rubble creates places for what's called cover and concealment, where soldiers who are fighting and can hide, or they can ambush, and it turned into a bloody mess. There's another parallel as well with World War II. The Wehrmacht, when they went into Poland and into Ukraine, and they were killing civilians, that the regular army was the commanders were writing back to higher command, said, "Look, this is destroying. We're getting some real psychological problems because people, normal people with a conscience, don't break down when they're killing women and children. And what this is showing in Israel is that they're not all monsters. That there are many that are in these reservists that they themselves have children, and when they're seeing these bodies starting to stack up and pile up, it's causing real emotional distress. So, Netanyahu's the entire objective in all of this has been to try to save his own ass from legal jeopardy, and in doing so, he's literally he's destroyed Israel's reputation, making Israel a pariah now among many nations, and it's growing, not diminishing, and now he's managed to alienate Donald Trump. I mean, I can't, I shouldn't laugh, but I think it's hilarious that, Trump wants to be liked. That's sort of what his weakness. He wants to be liked. And he's, I think, come to the realization that hanging out with Bibi makes him unlikable, and he doesn't like that.
D'accord.
Carl, if you were to assess the situation of IDF and Israeli army today compared to what it was before October 7th, how do you see the way that they are right now, the situation they're in right now?
In very bad shape. Very bad shape. Let's face it. One, they were not designed to be this kind of military. They were designed to be by the original sort of creators. Moshe Dayan comes to mind. They were designed, Sharon comes to mind. They were designed to be a blitzkrieg military, a military that just struck, won, and departed. And there, take that. Deterrence is reestablished. Do it again, and I'll hit you again, like an Operation Cast Lead, which was a precursor for what's happening right now, because they went out and killed everything that moved, men, women, children, everything else, and then said after a few weeks of operation, now, you see what we can do? We'll do it to anybody who challenges us. So take that lesson. And it was taken for a while. This, of course, was reestablishing deterrence after they had their butts kicked by Hezbollah back in, 2006. Yeah. So that's the way they operate. And the second thing that's playing on them right now is they haven't had a real conflict since 1973. And so they've been doing police duty. And they've become, in many cases, at checkpoints and other places, kind of draconian in that police duty and not very respective of human life. So that degraded them somewhat. Now they're in a situation, as I said, if they go ahead with this sustained military presence, where they're going to get defeated. And that's unusual to the max for the Israeli IDF. And morale and such, I'm told, is plummeting accordingly, especially amongst the reservists, not so much amongst the professionals. But then you think about PTSD like this for a moment. And we had this problem in Iraq, big time, especially around Fallujah and Al-Anbar province in particular. When you take people off the battlefield for TBI, PTSD, or whatever, PTSD in particular, you're taking those people off the battlefield who have a conscience. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten post-traumatic stress, what we used to call battle fatigue. What you're leaving are your killers, your murderers. That's what you're leaving on the battlefields. And that's what phenomenon is affecting Israel right now, too. That's why you get things like a buried ambulance and everybody killed in the ambulance. This is not good for a professional military. And you want those killers, if you're in a big war, you want them, because as S.L.A. Marshall said after World War II, 1 out of every 11 infantrymen really killed 90% of the enemy because they were killers and they did well at it. And the others kind of protected them. And that's the way the military works. Well, now you've got out there for Israel a lot of these killers and murderers. And that's just a recipe for more disaster for Israel. Their reputation is in tatters throughout the world, in tatters. They have no reputation other than brutality, murder, and genocide.
Larry, when Donald Trump has decided to go to the Red Sea to fight the Yemenis, I was thinking, what's the logic behind it? And right now, he's somehow leaving the Red Sea without achieving anything. Do you see the possibility that he's going to get back again, or you see a deal done? You see something that Donald Trump would never repeat it again?
Oh, no, I can't rule out that they certainly could do it again, but, they didn't understand, number one, they hadn't paid attention to what happened under the Biden administration with their start of Operation Prosperity Guardian, that they assumed that, but the Biden folks really weren't trying, that they were just only doing pro forma attacks, and by God, we're going to show them. It really shows sort of a failure to understand both U.S. capabilities and the nature of trying to dismantle what was going on in Yemen with the Houthis. And I attribute this to having just too many civilians that have had no experience working with trying to target mobile systems. We didn't take down a single Scud during the first Gulf War. Despite we're going to go get them, and I guess there's this assumption about our intelligence capabilities that we were able to, like the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings, can see everything and know where it's located, and that's not how it works. And particularly if you're trying to track anything that's out in the open sea, track ships like that, it's very difficult. And when you're trying to track missiles that are on land, that are in mobile launchers, there is not instantaneous. The closest we come to instantaneous communication.
Yeah, it seems that we've lost.
Which shot down? Why they shot down so many? They were shooting down one a week. Prior to that, they'd been shooting down like one a month. So, it was, they figured out, okay, yeah, we see that predator, we're going to take it out. So Trump's failure to understand the military dimensions of this, because he may understand how to build a hotel or a casino, but he doesn't know really a damn thing about this. And I don't think he's learned anything from it.
And Neiman, let me just say that I agree with what Larry just said. And let me add this particular aspect of my own experience. And I think I've read of much more experience in this regard. The blue suiters think that bombs will solve every problem.
Yeah.
They think that all you got to do is take off a carrier or take off out of Whiteman Air Force Base or out of Al Udeid or wherever and drop bombs on people. And the more you drop, the more success you're going to create. And the more success you create, the more bombs you're going to drop. That's their philosophy. They have been proven wrong since their original disciples laid this crap out. And yet we don't pay any attention to it. We still listen to them. Yeah. I had a 3-star Air Force general in the Pentagon tell me when I questioned him about his 80% of the targets in North Korea would be destroyed in the first hours by the Air Force on the peninsula and the Air Force reinforcing from the United States. And I challenged him. I said, why are you saying that? These howitzers are in caves. They roll out, they shoot, and they go back into the cave. Well, we know where every one of them is. And you're going to pinpoint every one of them. How many are there, General? And, we just got into an argument. And colonels don't get into argument with 3 stars. They get kicked out of the Pentagon when they do. And I was subsequently kicked out. But it's absurd to say that you're going to get 84% of the cannons the North Koreans are going to shoot at Seoul in the first 30 hours.
Yeah.
But Larry, part of the war, the conflict with Yemen is this psychological war. And you put yourself in the shoes of your enemy to understand where they stand, what do they think about you. And when you look at Yemen, earlier today I talked with Pepe Escobar. He recently was in Yemen, and he said these people, you have to be there to understand their sort of objectives. They don't care about the United States bombing their only airport just to destroy everything. They're going to fight back. And it doesn't seem this sort of understanding can be achieved on the part of the Trump administration or whoever making the decision in the United States.
No, that's one of our biggest failures as a country, that we are incapable. We're not incapable, but we rarely take time to understand both the culture, the mentality, the point of view of those that we perceive as either enemies or someone we need to attack. Look, I saw this right after 9/11 because back at the time I was directly involved with JSOC and SOCOM. Scripting exercises, called 0300, 0400 exercises. And so here you're dealing with the most elite forces in the U.S. military. We're not just talking Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. You got the folks out of Belvoir. You've got a bunch of covered air, I'm talking the very, very pointy end of the spear.
Got the guys who did Nord Stream.
Yeah. And the ignorance about they didn't know Sunni from Shia. They had no, as far as just a Muslim, and that's who we're going to kill, without and no appreciation for whatever our role had been in helping create this situation. No memory going back to what we did with training up terrorist groups in Pakistan that were used against the then Soviets in Afghanistan. Zero understanding. So all I'm saying is, what you're seeing now with Yemen, it's consistent. One of my friends and mentors, Pat Lang, he had been defense attaché in Yemen. He understood it. He had been, he knew the culture. But when
it seems that
come talk. Yeah, there we go. Come talk to me. I had this experience with Jerry Bremer because I was friends with Bremer before. That friendship became broken over the whole mess in Iraq. But I had literally had lunch with him 2 days before he was asked to take on the job of being the poobah in Iraq. And so I called him up because I knew he didn't. I said, "Hey, Jerry," I said, I started off. I said, "Boy, who did you piss off?" And he goes, "Well, when the president calls, you got to say yes." I said, "Okay." I said, "Let me help you out. Let me introduce you to Pat Lang." Because I gave him Pat's resume. Pat set up the Arabic program at West Point. Pat was defense attaché to Saudi Arabia and Yemen, but most importantly, he had been the one that hand-carried intelligence to the government of Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War. And he was the head of the Middle East division at the Defense Intelligence Agency. And Jerry goes, "No, I don't need to talk to him."
Sure.
How did that work out, Jerry? Yeah. So
you wouldn't talk to Sergio either.
Yeah.
Di Maio. It was absurd. Sergio had to move out there where he later died.
Yeah. Colonel, the other dimension of the conflict in the Middle East is what's going on between Iran and the United States.
Let me just say one other thing that
Go ahead.
I just poured into my head as he was saying that. You know, the Houthis, Allah Ansar, are a different sect than most of Yemen. And they don't like the fact that most of Yemen, which cares, and I suspect most of them don't care, but those who do care, say the mullahs and others, are oppressing them all the time. So I don't know that the Houthis actually worry about Sana'a being hit or any other target that takes out mostly other people in Yemen than they.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They're different sects.
Yeah. And getting to the conflict, Colonel, between the United States and Iran, here is what Tulsi Gabbard said about who's pushing for war and who's pushing for some sort of negotiations with Iran.
Those who are co-opted by the military-industrial complex, abusing their position to feed or manipulate intelligence, as we saw with the Iraq War, to start a new war. This intelligence community, the work that gets done in places like this every single day, has that power to be the fodder, the fuel, the seed that can lead to yet another unnecessary war. The New York Times article was a result of an unfortunate, unauthorized, and illegal leak of a very private conversation between the president and his advisors. I won't get into the details, but it was a very robust discussion that really speaks to President Trump's care and thoughtfulness as he makes his decisions around these very serious issues of war and peace. Ultimately, what we are doing is providing the president with the facts, the intelligence. Here is what the intelligence is telling us. As the Secretary of Defense, here are the options that are on the table and the likely outcomes that could occur if you go with course of action A, B, or C. And ultimately, it's the president who makes the decision. And he has made it clear time and time again that his goal with Iran, first of all, they cannot be in a position where they can develop or have a nuclear weapon, and that he believes and is confident in the opportunity that this moment provides to be able to achieve that outcome through peaceful means, through diplomacy and through negotiations. And he knows that that's what's in the best interest for the American people and for the world.
Coral, your take.
I couldn't have said it better. I mean, I couldn't believe she started with the military-industrial complex and the vicissitudes thereof, but she's telling the truth, and she's telling the truth basically about the other aspects of it. I don't know about Donald Trump. I'm not in his head, but that's the way the system is supposed to work. The president's supposed to be presented with the intelligence without any bias whatsoever, just the intelligence. It can be interpreted. It must be interpreted by professionals, not by vice presidents, for example, like Cheney did in the run-up to the Iraq War, by professionals. And they will usually say, I have a 90% surety on this, or an 85% surety on this, or this source is very reliable, or this source is brand new and not reliable. So you get the intelligence, and then you make the decisions based on the courses of action that if it's military, the Secretary of Defense gives you, along with the chairman, in terms of courses that you can pursue. And Trump then says, as she was intimating, I don't want to pursue any of those. I want to pursue diplomacy. You keep those in the drawer until I'm ready to use them if diplomacy fails. But I'm going to try diplomacy first. That's a smart move as far as I'm concerned. If that's what he's done, I applaud it.
Larry.
But there's, I don't know if you noticed, it was a day yesterday, 2 days ago, the news was filled with, oh, we got this imagery of this secret nuclear plant in Iran that's just been discovered. It's been there for 10 years. And it was, then you look, it was provided by this Iranian opposition group, who I guarantee is being paid for by the CIA. So what this tells me is the reason they're putting that out now is that I think there actually is some serious movements by Trump to negotiate a deal with Iran, that will not require Iran to give up all of its missiles and drones and to dismantle and disarm, but will put an end, a definitive end, to any suspicion that they're building a nuke. Iran wants that if they can get back to some sort of normal economic activity, because Iran's not the one that's been rampaging around the region, invading other countries.
There you go.
Because we go back to the start of the Iran-Iraq war. That was with U.S. encouragement to invade Iran. We put Saddam up to that basically, and so they do want peace. And it's again, it gets back to whenever you look at some of the news and the information comes out, you always got to start peeling back the layers, because it's never quite what it seems. Because I've had some friends, oh, look at this. This is proof that Iran's building a nuke. And I had to go back and say, just look at the source of the information for starters. And right away that it's in the male bovine excrement category.
One other thing, Nima, I would say, after agreeing with everything Larry said, I got the inclination there to believe, and I've gotten it in other places too, I've been disabused of it in other places too, that she really wants to do something about the very insidiousness of aspects of the CIA and other elements within the intelligence community too. And she hadn't figured out exactly what to do yet and exactly how to go about it. But I would say one of the most insidious things I saw in my time in government was how we were using, through the CIA, the idea of liberal democracy to establish in country after country after country color revolutions, or the equivalent thereof, that were not in the interest of that country, its regional partners, or in many cases us. And yet we went ahead and did it.